Hey folks, I'm John Miller, ESA's Director of Membership and Communication. Before I came to ESA though, I spent most of my career doing workforce development and career services in a few different organizations. So although I might not seem like the most pertinent person to talk to you all about some of these like important employability skills, this is actually a fairly familiar field to me. And when we did go all virtual, I thought that I might still be able to help out with some of the content around these questions, understanding that, there's a demand for it, and folks always need a little bit of guidance when it comes to different ways that they can get a job, especially when they're just entering the professional world. So if you haven't seen them yet, I encourage you to also check out my presentations on resumes and on networking. This particular session is on interviews, and I promise you that I will keep it shorter than the other two, although it is still a little bit substantive. So why are job interviews important? You've probably been on at least one in your life. They can be intimidating. Really, nobody likes to do them, which does include the employers themselves as much as it includes prospective employees. And a lot of the time, they feel almost completely perfunctory because you're qualified for the job, and it should be obvious to anybody who sees your excellent resume that you're qualified. So really, what's the point of going through all this dog and pony show that is an interview? But really, that gets to the reason why an interview is important. They're the best opportunity for you and for your potential employer to see how well your skills align with the company's needs. And you and they can get better acquainted individually, right, person to person. You can get like that all-important read on each other, and then you can meet potential colleagues, and then everybody has a chance to get more information to help both you and they decide if you happen to be the right person for this job. So great, it sounds like that actually sounds pretty great. Everybody wishes they could probably do that for most things in life, right? And that's kind of the thing though, right? If that's all true, why isn't that interviews are so nerve-wracking? I mean, they are high stakes. We don't get jobs because we just really, really want to work for a living. We get jobs because we need to work for a living. And it's nice to be able to get a job that corresponds to our interests and our passions and things like that. But that the perfect opportunity isn't always there. Sometimes you have to work to get to your right opportunity and everything else. So hence there's a lot of pressure that comes with doing interviews because you have to do them well if you're going to get the jobs that you need and want and everything else. But that being acknowledged, I can tell you that you can in fact relax, because although interviews can be a challenge, there are some tried and true techniques that you can use to actually ace the interview. And while that in itself is no guarantee for getting the job, it certainly massively increases your odds of getting in there. Now, if we were going to be doing this session as a workshop in person, like it had been originally planned, we would start off with a mock demonstration just to give you an idea of what a bad interview looks like. And then we would talk about what some of the bad things are, and then we'd review some best practices in interviewing. I would turn everybody loose in small groups to do some mock interviewing amongst yourselves, and then pick a volunteer to come up and now that you had a chance to practice, to demonstrate some better technique and better ways to answer common questions in front of the group, and we'll have a little bit more feedback and everything else. That would have been a great workshop. The fact of the matter is though that the limits of the technology that we have and the fact that we went all virtual with kind of short notice means that we're going with a much more stripped down version here. We're going to just talk about some best practices. What I do encourage you to do though is to sign up for a mock interview over the course of the meeting. You can find the links to the signups for that on the Career Central pages. I believe that they're linked out from inside the program as well. But it's something to do. We have lots of volunteers who are more than happy to sit with you for a little while, walk you through some common questions, and just kind of give you some feedback on how you answer and what you should look forward to in the future. So some must-dos, and this is where I'm saying like we're really going to cover some high-level stuff here. The sort of regardless of what the situation are, these are just things that you should definitely at least have in mind, if not like actively do while you're in an interview kind of situation. Do research the company ahead of time. Learn about the organization, its mission, the people on the team, If you can, learn about their histories, especially learn about a person who might be interviewing you or that you would be reporting to. This can just open up much better conversation that you have with them. It also can give you some insights into maybe how all of this is going to work. And I'll come back to this a little bit later on, but when you've done some of this research, you can ask better questions, which really speaks well for you and your interest in the position and that you care about it. Be early. And I don't mean like show up at 9:58 if the interview is at 10. I mean show up at 9:50 at the latest for a 10 o'clock interview. At least 10 minutes you should give yourself as the acceptable time to arrive. If you have to, because you know your habits or just because you know how things go, do like I do, change the time on your watch so that it's running fast, change the time on your alarm clock, change the time on your phone, just whatever you have to do, make sure that you're coming in early, because early is on time and on time is late and late is get out. People don't take nicely to what they view as like wastes of their time. They want to be ready to go when it's time to go, and maybe even start a little bit early because people value their time and they're going to want to have the interview and then get back to work. You know, it's tough. I do recommend doing dry runs of transportation, especially if you're like in an urban environment where traffic can be a little bit dicey or you have to rely on public stuff that may or may not be running completely on time on the day you need it to be. If you do a couple dry runs, you get a feel for sort of what the rhythms are, what to expect here and there. Then if you need to, pad out more time. Perfectly okay, but just always be mindful of the fact that the only way to be on time is to be significantly early. I know it doesn't sound fair, and frankly it isn't, but that's how it works. And neither I nor you can fix that yet. Not today. I'm just trying to equip you with some tools that'll be useful for you. When you dress professionally. At ESA, we practice what you might call sort of like a business casual attire rule. Obviously, now that we're all working from home, that's a little bit more flexible than it would be normally. And we're not super sticklers for it either. Those of us who are on the senior staff do tend to dress, you know, in that line just to set a good example. But, you know, I wear jeans. A former director of ours would wear shorts in the summertime. As long as you're neat and presentable, most of the time it's okay to be dressed like that in the workplace, especially in the modern workplaces, because, you know, the whole suit culture is disappearing, which frankly I think is good. However, don't dress the same way the office staff is for the interview. At least take one step up on the formality ladder and on the professionalism ladder than what they're dressed as. And if you need to call ahead and ask, you know, I mean, it can be anybody. It can be reception. It can be the person you're interviewing with. It can be HR, whoever. But ask somebody, hey, what's the dress code normally? And if they say, oh, it's business casual. Okay, now you're definitely wearing a suit to the interview. If they laugh at the question and say that, you know, I mean, the CEO comes in in ripped jeans every week, then you can say, okay, maybe I'll just do business casual. But you should just anticipate that you should be dressing up to a certain extent. You don't have to go black tie or white tie, nothing formal wear, but like just good business attire. Very few people were offended if you do that, but they might get offended if you come in, you know, underdressed. Similarly, mind your basic etiquette. This is just old school rules for how people were respectful to each other, right? Shake hands firmly when you greet a person, make and maintain eye contact, smile. It's very nice to meet you. Project a certain amount of confidence and also like a pleasantness. Don't be arrogant, you know, be confident. You feel good about this and you want other people to feel good about it too, right? You know, you smile, you laugh at their jokes, you have some witty repartee. It's all good. Those are really easy ways to just participate in some really high level etiquette when it comes to the business stuff. If somebody offers you water, accept it. It's a hospitality kind of a thing. Stay standing unless you're invited to sit. If your feet hurt or you had to walk a long way or something like that, you want to catch your breath, you want to look at some documents before you actually go into the interview, you can ask permission. Hey, may I sit here for a minute, please? And they will always say yes, and it's okay. But it's just about minding like those basic things of etiquette. Again, this stuff isn't like the same as it was, you know, a generation, 2 generations ago. Before that, I have no idea. But you know, just because it's not always going to be the case that people expect you to be on this sort of like best behavior from an etiquette perspective doesn't mean that you shouldn't practice it. It's a good idea to do it just as a fail-safe. And then when you are speaking, do so with positive, like a lot of positivity and with a lot of energy. You know, if you're just kind of talking, sort of mumbling through everything, and you're guys maybe not really all that engaged, and this interview is kind of boring, it's kind of below me actually. You may as well just leave, honestly. Interviews are about making impressions, and people want to be with people who want to be there, and people want to bring in people who want to be there. If you're worried about like putting a good positive spin on everything, I'll actually show you right here a good way that you can put a positive spin on even like answering a question in the negative, which is like, it's just a good way to think about like how you can respond to some of these challenges. So I'm like, I'm the interviewer right here. Say, what do you consider to be the thing about yourself that most needs to be developed? And here I'm referring to skills or something like that, right? I'm the interviewee. Wow, you know, this has actually changed for me over time. As recently as last year, I would have said that it would have been my time management, but I've put a lot of conscious effort into learning some techniques to be better there. So I don't think that's really it. I would say now that if there was something that I could really improve on, it would be some of my software skills. I've actually started to practice some like online tutorials and getting better at some of like Excel functions and things like that so that I can be a little bit more effective with it. I think that's something I can continue to work on, and I hope to continue to improve. So in just a couple of sentences, I have communicated to an answer to a question that's asking me to say something negative about myself. Instead, I've said that I am self-aware, I'm proactive, I take steps to improve, I have already successfully done so, and that I am currently working to continue to improve. People love continuous improvement. I'm not kidding. If you can do things on your resume, then cover this in a resume lesson, but this is just something to think about. If you can cover in your resume, like continuing education and continued improvement over the course of your career, it looks so good because it shows that you care and that you always want to learn and grow. A few tactics now, like to just help you ace the interview, such as it is. Number one, develop an elevator pitch. I referenced these in the session on networking. And I'm going to have some resources available on the Career Central, web resources. Also, you can Google and find all kinds of help on elevator pitches. They are your friend. Develop one. And then once you've developed one, practice it. Run it by your friends and colleagues. Get real-time feedback from people. Encourage people to ask you questions about what you say in your elevator pitch so that you can follow up on it. Maybe you'll get hints on how you can be, more direct and succinct. Learn it to the point that you're so comfortable saying this little spiel about yourself and your career that you can do so like underwater, blindfolded, upside down, with the lights out and a siren blaring in your ear. Nothing can distract you from being able to deliver this elevator pitch. And then once you feel comfortable with it to that extent, start using it like all the time. One, it continues to be good practice. But the thing is, at the beginning of almost every interview, they're going to ask you to say a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you want to do, why you want to work for this company. And that's where the elevator pitch comes in handy. Because in about 30 seconds, you can tell them your entire story, and it sounds great because you've been working on it and you have lots of good words in it. Another thing is like when you are responding to questions, what you want to try to do is relate everything that you can back to that why you're great for the job. Always be positive, right? So don't leave the proposition about whether you happen to be the right person open to interpretation for the interviewer. Instead, keep telling them about how great you are, right? This is me, I'm pretending that I'm responding to a question again. Well, I've been working in different kinds of science communication in addition to social for a really long time. In fact, one thing that you'll see on my resume from earlier in my career is the time that I spent as an interpreter at the local botanical garden for some school groups. I think having done that and some other projects really makes me better at like the whole social component of communication, because I can communicate with different age groups and I can do it really succinctly. But in addition to that, I think that experience helps to make me a good cross-functional communicator, but I think, from what you described makes it sound like I would do really well here working with some of the other offices like our education group. They wanted to hear an answer to a question. I gave it to them. And along the way, I happened to say why I'm going to be good at this job and good kinds of things that sound good to people. If you can highlight teamwork, cross-functional, leadership, stuff that shows you play well with others, stuff that shows that you take orders well, stuff that says that you're well organized, always refer to those things if you can. They don't always show through on a resume quite the same way that they will when you're talking out loud with a person. So if you can talk about them, take the opportunity. They're great selling points about yourself. This goes doubly so if you are the one who is asking the question. The thing is that toward there's always a part in every interview. I don't want to say exactly what it is. There's always a part where you will be asked if you have questions for the company or the person who's interviewing you, right? And you can use that to your advantage by, for instance, asking about what some of the common challenges are, which is a common question to have in this kind of situation. What are some challenges that this position is expected to help resolve, to work on? When they answer, you can address their answer by saying that you actually have the tools or the way to succeed with that, and you can point back to your prior experience or prior skills that you've gained. This, in the interest of time, I'll skip an example on that one, but I think you get the idea, right? It's about really using the emergent information as a tool to help continue to paint you in a really positive light as a person who's going to fit in here really well and do a great job with the position and continue to grow in it and maybe expand it. Another thing that employers love. So speaking of that thing with common interview questions, definitely find out what common interview questions are. You can look them up online, and definitely practice your responses to them. If just for a few examples, these are like the tell me about yourself kinds of questions that you would answer like with an elevator pitch. But then there's stuff about, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face? What are some of your biggest accomplishments? What are things that you think you need to work on? What is your preferred working style? All that kind of stuff. They almost always come up in one way or another in an interview. So practice answers for them. If you can get to where you have a muscle memory in your mind, right? So that when a question comes, you have an answer for it that doesn't really require you to think very much. That actually helps to keep you nimble when it comes to needing to think through other questions. One example that I've used in the past was a time when I was being interviewed, not for ESA, but the position I was in before that. And at that point, it was my 10th interview in that particular round of job searching, and my fourth one for that position. They had a really rigorous hiring process with that organization. And the one thing that I've been asked in every interview up to that point, it had to do with a particular kind of project that I used to have, that I would work on. So I knew how to answer that stuff inside and out. And when I got thrown a little bit of a curveball on it, and the very last person I had to talk to, who was the VP of that division, I was able to answer it without adding more than another second's worth of thought, because I already had the particulars down. I just had to give it a little bit of a turn to account for the fact that the question was turned a little bit differently. It's really helpful to have these answers worked out ahead of time. But speaking of this kind of stuff, though, you have to be wary of what are called trap questions. Trap questions are also very common. Trap questions are perfectly okay to be asked. You should expect to get at least a couple of them over the course of your interview. But what they are is they are very easy, even when they aren't being deliberately asked to trip you up. They're really easy to trip up. And when you do that, you wind up inadvertently giving a bad impression. Like I was saying before, putting a positive spin on a negative answer or a negative outcome is a good way to beat a trap question. But there are some other approaches that are a little bit less straightforward. Somebody asks you, why do you want to leave your current company, for instance? You don't want to say, because my boss is a jerk and nobody there likes me. That makes you look like a problem, right? Nobody wants to bring in a person who's might be a bad apple or have a bad attitude. Instead, you want to say something along the lines of, I'm just looking for new opportunities. I'm looking for, some new challenges, new ways to grow. I feel like this is the next step in my career path, something like that. It is a little bit more acceptable nowadays to refer to particular workplace culture as like in a negative and why you would want to leave a place, because it's certainly become much more of a common thing that people talk about in interviews as a selling point for an organization. Oh, we love each other here. We like a big family. We go out for happy hours together all the time. We have great benefits. We have a really horizontal structure, all those kinds of things. That's because that stuff comes up in interviews now as like reasons to work in a place. It's actually become more common that people can talk about those things don't exist in other places and why they may want to come in and make a change. Kind of similarly, people are becoming much more aware of things like racism and sexism dynamics in the workplace. And as a result, it's a little bit of, do so at your own risk. I don't recommend necessarily bringing up some of those kinds of things because you don't know who you're talking to oftentimes in your interview, and the person you're talking to might not be sympathetic and or may blame you for there being a problem in the first place, right? But just I will say that there are places now where you can interview, and if you get the right kind of vibe, you might feel comfortable saying, actually, as I'm not an oppressed person myself, but if I were, I might be able to say, as a person of color, I felt, like I'm not heated there. I feel like I'm being not taken seriously, or as a woman, I'm not being taken seriously. That kind of thing. Use judiciously, use as you feel is appropriate. But otherwise, give answers that are pretty politically correct, if to use a terrible term, somewhat accurately, I guess. Just really right down the middle. Nobody would be particularly offended if you're looking for a new opportunity. You know what I mean? One other thing that you should definitely do when you're having this conversation, this interview with a person, is you should practice active listening. And if you're unfamiliar with active listening, I touch on this some in the networking presentation. But what it really is exactly what it says it is. You're listening actively. It's a conscious practice by which you adopt certain physical postures. You you lean in, you head tilt, you maintain eye contact, or also good as like eye and like mouth contact, where the person's speaking, but definitely on their face. Don't stare past them. Don't look at their shoulder, look at their face. As they make points, nod, yeah, make little gestures and sounds that say that you're hearing what they're saying, you understand what they're saying, you're following, right? And then when you get a chance, ask a follow-up question, right? Like, oh, so that's interesting. What about, I hadn't actually thought of that way. Huh, interesting. Don't do it insincerely, but if you're actively listening, that's the thing. It kind of pulls you in, and you can't help but be a good listener when you're active listening. And as a result, you're going to be giving off this positive, really authentic vibe that's going to be helpful for you. It's also going to help you retain the information that you hear better, and you'll be more directly engaged in the conversation, which I come back to the thing about asking questions of your own. If you've been actively listening, you can ask more thoughtful questions, which is going to go a long way for you. Usually, like I said, you will be asked or given the opportunity to ask some questions. And unless you're completely bombing the interview, which does happen, and it may happen to you, and I'm terribly sorry if it does. It's happened to me. It's a bad feeling, but you just pick them up and you kind of keep going with it. When you get this opportunity, take it. Nothing says this person doesn't care about a job or about this job quite like, do you have any questions for us? Nope, I think we got it. That's a terrible way to respond. My gosh, they don't care about this at all. And now I don't even know if I want to talk about this anymore. But take a few minutes. Think about some of the things that, that you already had in the discussion. You can relate back to them, or you can sort of frame a particular item that you felt particularly good about. Maybe it's something about one of your strengths or something that you did well that they seem to respond well to, and kind of, reposition it and come back to it in a way that puts the onus for its import onto the organization and the manager, right? Because now they have to think about how much value you bring into the equation. I know, like, if you're like kind of new and you haven't done a ton of interviews and like that seems like a really advanced technique, it might be, but that's fine. Look up common questions to ask in an interview online, and you can just use some of those. There are some really normal ones, like, what is your particular management style, manager person I'm interviewing with? How big is the team actually? What are the reporting relationships? Stuff like that. You know, what is the workplace culture like? And for what it's worth, if you did your research about the organization and the people at the time, you have some stuff that you can ask about, right? And I recommend writing down those questions while you're doing that research. Another really important thing, because people, especially when they're new, will sometimes fall back on this, because it's right there, and sometimes it's right there in your hands, but don't narrate your resume. They've seen your resume. Presumably they've read your resume, they liked your resume, and that's why you're here. When asked to talk about your experience, don't just go back through the resume, and don't spend a ton of time, even when answering direct questions about some of the things that are on it, rehashing those details. Use the resume as an outline, and by all means refer to the good things that you've done that you refer to that are in there. But in general, you want to be talking much more in depth than your resume is showing, and you want to highlight the good things about yourself that can appear in a resume, like your personality, like your positive attitude. You know, and when you're talking about your personal history, you want to make it way more interesting than just moving from one position to another position and doing this thing here and then doing a slightly more advanced version of it in this other place. They don't, I mean, they care about that. That's why you're there. But like in the interview, that's not what they want to hear. They want to hear about how good you are. They want to hear your awesome, sterling personality. So that's what you should give to people. Talk about your success. Talk about your contributions. Shine. They already looked at the paper. They don't need to continue to look at the paper. And sort of finally, be authentic. This is, again, I talk about this stuff in the networking one too, and frankly, that makes a ton of sense because networking and interviewing are really similar skill sets. But when you're in an interview, authenticity matters. Like I said, yes, be truthful, and yes, employ some spin, you know, to make something that might seem not as good to be better than, you know, it might seem. It's just an answering technique. You're not lying. But, you know, but if you have enthusiasm about it, show that you have enthusiasm about it. Do that active listening, right? And you almost can't avoid being and seeming authentic if you are actually doing it, which you're going to be doing if you're practicing active listening. You know, if you're able to show that you care, you're much more likely to get the job because that's who they want to have in. They want to have in people who care and want to do the job and want to succeed in it. Conversely, if you kind of don't care, or if you are deeply unimpressed by this experience, you can, I mean, don't say that out loud, that's kind of offensive, but you can excuse yourself even from an interview. I've done it once. Again, it's awkward, but I felt like I'm kind of wasting my time here and I'm wasting their time, and it will probably behoove me and make me look better to make this move now than to continue down this pathway that I don't think anybody's terribly interested in right now. That's all just going through the motions. You can also turn down interviews. Sometimes when you have a phone, like a phone screen, you'll learn more than you had before when you applied, and you realize this probably isn't an opportunity for you. You get called about an interview, maybe don't take it. If you're offered a follow-up interview after the phone screen, like immediately after, at the end of it, you can say no if it's not there. Don't chase down negatives because you think you need to. You don't. You know, ultimately how you feel about a particular job is going to show through, and it'll make a difference in whether you get hired. If you want it, you know, communicate how bad and how much you want it. Don't be desperate. That also rubs people the wrong way, but just be like, you know, confident, calm, strong. I feel that I can do this. I really want to do it. I want to work together with you. It's going to be great. You know, that's how you want to be communicating about yourself. And if you don't feel it, then it's probably best that you think about it differently. So that's like a really high level way of looking at all of this stuff. You know, I do have asynchronous Q&A, and I encourage you to think about your resume, or think about your interview experience, or think about things that you might have that are questions that may have emerged from this, and go ahead and use that asynchronous Q&A. I'm happy to answer questions about this. Like I said, I have a ton of experience in career development and workforce and stuff like that. So I'm very comfortable talking with folks. Just don't ask me scientific questions because I can't answer those. But some other things that you can do: sign up for a mock interview, use the form that's on the Career Central page for the meeting. You might also want to consider the sessions on resumes and networking. Sign up for a resume review on that same page. If you want to have like an established ecological pro talk to you in real time about some of this stuff. It's the same kind of feedback you'll get from the mock interview, because they'll ask you some of those common questions and they'll give you feedback on your answers. Also, our early career ecologist section has a mentoring program of its own, and I encourage you, if you are an early career ecologist or if you're a student, to look into that kind of thing, just because they're beneficial and you get some peer support as well. And then even if you aren't able to work on some of these other things, I always encourage you to practice your interview skills with friends. You can find common questions and common responses and common questions to ask back and common list of trap questions and all that kind of stuff online. Like I said, I'll have some of those resources linked on the website so you can pull them off yourself, but also feel comfortable looking online. There are a million resources out there, but practice with each other. Sit across the table, just in a straight role play. One person is filling this role, the other person's filling this role, and you work through it together. I promise you, you'll feel much better having practiced, and when you actually get into those situations, you are going to do better as a result. That is it, folks. I thank you for joining. I thank you for being part of the meeting. I thank you for being part of ESA. The best of luck to you, and I hope that the meeting is a good and enjoyable one for you. So enjoy.